Hello there everybody, my name is Arseni, and today we're going to go over how you can create a dynamic DAO class in Java using JPA and Hibernate. Let's jump right in. For starters, you're going to want to open up IntelliJ IDEA. If you want, you can do this in Eclipse or NetBeans. The process is pretty much the same. So let's go ahead and create a new project. We're going to be using Maven for this project just because it makes installing libraries that much easier. If you don't know Maven, don't worry. It's all fairly simple. We're not going to be going into it too much. You'll understand everything that I do here. It's very straightforward. So after you've selected Maven, and in Eclipse it's going to be pretty much the same, except you're going to want to go to New, File, Maven Project. Let's just put the group ID as group and artifact ID as artifact. Okay, and for the project name, we're going to do a example dynamic database controller. Okay, maybe the naming isn't really quite accurate, but it'll do, just as an example. Okay, and there we go. So after you've loaded your project, you're going to want to define this pom.xml file. This is very straightforward. It's a Maven-specific file that essentially just contains information about your Maven project. We're going to be using this to install our dependencies. Now we're going to go ahead and go into the first link in the description, which is going to send you to a JDBC Maven repository. So this essentially just allows us to get the JDBC driver for connecting to MySQL in Java, and you do want to have MySQL installed for this tutorial. So all you're going to want to type is dependencies inside your Maven pom.xml file, and in there you're going to put the dependency for the Java JDBC connector. After you've done that, in Eclipse, I believe it will auto import, or in IntelliJ IDEA, you're going to want to click import changes. It's going to take a second to go ahead and do it. And there we go. After a couple seconds, we now have a installed JDBC dependency. So right here, as you can see, it installed the necessary jar files to work with JDBC. Okay. Next, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go to the second link in the description, which will give us the Hibernate Maven repository. Go ahead and click on the latest version. This is core Hibernate. It is best for learning Hibernate. You know, no extreme features. Perhaps I'll do a video about the more extreme features in the future. Go ahead and add that dependency link in as well, and import changes. And there we go. So now we finally have our dependencies installed. Okay, moving on. Okay, now we're going to go into our Java file. We're going to go ahead and click New and File. We're going to type the file name as Persistence.xml. Make sure you name it correctly. And we're going to go ahead and paste this code. This code will be in the description below. Don't worry, what it's doing here essentially is it's just telling Hibernate where our database is located. So in this case, what we're doing is we're locating MySQL database, localhost 336, and the database name is Classic Models. You're going to want to have Classic Models created ahead of time in order to use Hibernate with the database, I guess. Other than that, if you don't know how to create a database or don't know how to, install MySQL on your computer, I'll have a link up in the top right of the video as of now, and you could click there. Here we're also giving it the username and the password to connect to the MySQL database. In my case, I'm just going to go and use the root password, and I believe I don't have a password. So yeah, root username, and I don't have a password. Yeah, there we go. And so this just tells us a lot about what essentially we're going to do with our database, and it's a properties file. Pretty accurate. So it says properties and essentially properties. So here it's also saying that it's not going to auto save for us. So that's essentially what it's going to do. All right, so now in Java, what we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and create a new class. I don't know why I have an Apex class up there. This isn't an Apex project. Okay. So now what we're going to do is name this class client. Okay, now we're going to create a new class. This class is going to be named bank. And our final class is going to be named main. So this main class essentially is just where we're going to do, create our code. And here we're also going to want to create public static void main string args. There we go. It's a main method. If you don't know what a main method is, perhaps you should not be starting learning Java with a complex framework like Hibernate. Okay. Other than that, let's go ahead and get into the actual Hibernate part of this tutorial. Okay, so let's start with our bank class. First of all, we have to give it the @entity annotation. This is essentially just telling our Hibernate program that this is something that we're going to put into the database. So we could put it into the database essentially. We're also going to add an @table annotation, which essentially just gives us the table name. And inside the parentheses of the annotation, we could put in, let's just say, banks table. There we go. And so now we could move on to the bank class. The bank class, what we're going to put, first of all, is an ID. This will just give us that we have an ID field. And also we're going to put in generated value. Generator equals incrementor, if I can spell that correctly. That's an M, incrementer. All this is going to do is just create tell our Hibernate program that when we put it into the table, we want every single value's ID to go up by 1. And finally, we actually need to create the ID. So we're going to create a private int ID. And there we go. So we now have a bank value that we will insert into the bank's table when we do insert it, and it will have a int ID property that will auto increment. But if we at this point we cannot use bank because the ID is private, and so Hibernate cannot access it. So what we need to do is we need to add getter and setter methods. So I'm sure all of you are familiar with what getter and setter methods are, since you are learning Hibernate. Let's go ahead and generate getters and setters. I believe there's a button to do both of them at once, but I totally forgot where it is. And finally, let's add another column name. Column. There we go. And the name will be ID. And in a second, you'll see exactly what this is all doing and where we're going with this. This is going to be private. Wait, no, this name is not going to be ID. I'm very sorry about that. It's going to be name. Column name equals name and private string name. There we go. By the way, I completely forgot. We also need to add a column up here. So this is going to be column name equals ID. There we go. And you'll see where this column will come into play later on. Now, for our string name, we also need to add getter and setter methods, of course. So let's go ahead and do that. If IntelliJ, there we go, getter and setter, it was right under there, and there we go. So now we have we actually have a class called bank, I guess, which we can directly import into a database, and Hibernate will know what to do with it. Okay, so now let's move on to our client class. Essentially, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do @entity, then we're going to do @table equals @table name equals client. I forgot how to type table. There we go. And now we're going to add in @ID. ID, there we go. Then we're going to add @column, and then we're going to put in name equals ID. And here we're not going to set it actually to auto increment because I just feel like it, okay? So now we're going to go ahead and put in private integer ID. There we go. And now if we go ahead and generate getter and setter methods. And there we go. So now we have our ID set up, and now we're going to go ahead and add another one. another column. This is going to be called name equals name. And there we go. Oh, we don't need the parentheses, do we? Here we're going to have private string name. So essentially just like our bank class. There's really no difference. And then generate getters and setters. And there we go. So now we have a complete and ready Hibernate class. Alright, so now let's finally do it our main method. Okay, so in your main class, you're going to want to go ahead and copy in this code. This will also be in the description, or you could type it out. Typing it out always, remember it a little bit better to learn. The only thing to really note here is that you want this org.hibernate tutorial JPA to be the same as in your Persistence.xml file, org hibernate tutorial JPA. As long as you have that as the same, then you're golden. Okay, so back in our main file, what we're going to go ahead and do is create a new client object. Client equals new client. There we go. We're going to go ahead and client.set ID. Oh, yeah, let's just say 2. It's an integer. And client.set name. We're going to set the name as Bob. Why not? Why not, right? Then we're going to go ahead and create a new bank. Bank equals new bank. And remember, we don't have to set an ID here. Only a name, and we're going to call it Wells Fargo. No bank in particular that's named after, just a completely random name I thought of on the spot. Okay, so now what we can go ahead and do is go into our entity manager dot persist, and now we can go ahead and add in client and then entity manager dot persist, and we can go ahead and add in bank. There we go. And finally, what we're going to do is we're going to do entity manager dot get transaction dot commit. There we go. So essentially what we're doing here is committing the entity manager into the database, sort of. We did set auto commit to false in the Persistence.xml. It is good to not have auto commit on because it sometimes may not work the way you want it to, and you could lose great amounts of data. The chance is small, but nevertheless it is there. And without auto committing, it just everything is very, very on point, if I can say it like that. Okay, this is our Sunny from the future here. We also need to add an entity manager.getTransaction.begin. Completely forgot about that. Add that in, you're golden. Okay, so now we have a code that will input these objects into our database. So now let's go ahead and run this code. And after we run it, then we can see exactly what is happening where. Okay, so now after I have created a run configuration to run with the main class, we're going to go ahead and run it and see exactly what happens. Okay, and we have an error, which is good. In Spring, for example, if you have an error, it'll tell you have an error, but it won't tell you where. It'll just tell you there's an error, which will result in hours of frustration. But in Hibernate, it's pretty good because it tells you exactly where the problem is. Okay, so essentially what you're going to want to do is, what I didn't do, is a Persistence.xml has to be in a specific, class path in order for this to work. So we're going to go ahead and go to resources. If you don't have a meta-in folder in there already, just go ahead and create one and just drag your Persistence.xml into that meta-in folder. And there we go. All right, so now let's go ahead and run it again. Okay, and finally, one more error that I completely forgot to fix in bank, generated value. Generator, we want incrementer, then you also want to add generic generator. So name equals incrementer, and then the strategy equals increment. Completely forgot about that. That's what you need to add in order for it to work perfectly. Okay, so now let's go ahead and run it. Give it a couple seconds here. And there we go. So as you can see here, we actually, since we have in Persistence.xml, right here, show SQL true, it will actually show us the SQL that it's performing. So create table banks table, create table client table, select max ID from bank table, so that's for the incrementation, insert into clients table, and insert into banks table. So now if we go into our into our MySQL terminal and go ahead and, for example, select all from banks table, you will see it will give us name Wells Fargo, ID 1. And if we go into select all from clients table, I did a bit of debugging here. Clients table. It's actually client table. There we go. It'll give us ID 1, name Bob. So now let's take a look at exactly what's happening here. So when we go ahead and let's go ahead and close this up. Since we, in our bank.java file, we actually have the table name equals banks table. So that just creates a banks table if there already isn't one. And then it adds to it a field ID, which has, which strategy of which is increment, so it auto increments. So every single time you add a new value to the table, it will increment the ID by 1. There we go. Got that out. Okay, and actually, it also has a name. In this case, we assigned Wells Fargo, so that's what that does. And then with client, the same thing. Table name client table. ID, in this case, it's 1, since I have 1 inside the set ID. And name equals Bob, since I have Bob inside the client.setName. So that's essentially all that. And that's essentially how you use a Hibernate. That's a very simple example, easy to wrap your head around. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you next time. Till soon.